But it didn't say he wasn't going to have some more people, of which we would then have to understand deeper meanings to what he was saying. So all of those people who tell you that the Old Testament can't apply to the church, you ask them, then how did they apply Joel 2:28 to 32? Say, well, God cannot work with the church and Israel at the same time. Then you ask them, why did Jesus prophesy in all of the discourse that Jerusalem was going to be destroyed, and then 40 years later it happened during the church age? Must have been working with both. How many of you would tell me that Israel is not back over there due to God doing something with them? You mean Israel is back in the land now and God had absolutely nothing to do with it? No, you know better than that. That's a system contrived to fool you, not to give you clear meaning on a biblical text. Now, when someone says to you, the tribulation, they use that word kind of in a colloquial sense, the tribulation. You got to ask them a question. Now, what are you talking about? Because in Daniel chapter 12, verse 1 and following, the time of distress is limited to no longer than 3.5 years, never 7. So there's nowhere in the Bible it says that the tribulation is 7 years. Please show it to me. I'm willing to be taught. Because it's not used there. The Great Tribulation is said to be something, terrible time on the earth, when the righteous are dying, not the wicked. The wicked are killing the righteous. But when God begins his wrath against the wicked, then I'm going to have a whole lot of time to be killing a whole lot of righteous people. By the time we get to those bold judgments, it's going to be too late anyway. So the Great Tribulation is an unknown period of time that God is going to allow his people to suffer. Now, last point. If the word church doesn't appear in the Old Testament, but God is going to save Gentiles, that is announced in the Old Testament. He comes along and he uses the word elect. It says, my elect. So, well, the word elect is limited to only the Jews. Not so. The term elect is used 3 ways in the Bible. It can refer to elect Israel to service. Jews saved and lost are elect to service. You elect to service by birth. You are a Jew. You were supposed to represent God on the earth. You were supposed to help people to know God. That was a Jew's responsibility by being into Abraham. You were elected to service. Service had nothing to do with whether you were saved or lost. You could later be saved, but when you were born, on the day that you were born, you were elected as a Jew to be a representative of God before the world. That's election to service. But there were also Jews elected to salvation. Some Jews had the great privilege, all Jews had the opportunity, I believe, to some degree, but you could be elected to service and to salvation. All Jews are not elected to salvation. You and I both know that. It hurts our hearts. They're not all elect to service. They're all elect to service, but they're not all elect to salvation. You got to be of the seed of Abraham, and then you got to come by faith to be a Jew elect to salvation. But Gentiles are also elect to salvation. No Gentile is elect to service in the sense of Israel. But Gentiles can be elect to salvation. So when the Bible talks about the elect, you got to check the context. Is he talking about elect to service, or is he talking about elect to salvation? So in the book of Daniel, you say, well, the only elect running around the earth at that time were mostly Jews. That is correct. But it says nothing about what he's going to do later. We get to the New Testament and we're throwing the word elect around, and he's talking about elect Gentiles. You say, well, which one is he replying to? He's replying to all elect. Now, the Great Tribulation is Satan's wrath against God's elect. Anybody on God's side. He's not going to say, well, you know what, you people became Christians after church was gone, I'm not going to persecute you. I'm just after the elect of Israel. I'm just going to get them. Friend, of course not. Come on. The elect refers in salvation to Jews and Gentiles. And the Great Tribulation is going to be Satan's wrath against God's elect. In my book, God's Elect, the Great Tribulation, I explain this in great detail because it is an important issue that's been very confused to people who want to make you believe that God's program for Israel and God's program for the church can never touch. And that simply is not true. Now, that does not mean that Israel doesn't have a future, because they do, separate and distinct in their own. They're going to have their land. They're going to finally live as God promised them. Abraham died believing that, and God is not going to change the program while Abraham was dead. God is going to fulfill his promise, just as he said. But the promise has been expanded there to include you to a certain degree. Because every one of you sitting in this room are elect to some of the privileges of Israel. The fact that you have salvation is through Abraham. The fact that you're able to enjoy some of the blessings of God that comes through that covenant you have right now. But it's through them to you, but you enjoy it and you enjoy it and you share in it as a bride of Christ. Now, the big question is Matthew 24. Doesn't apply to the church. Oh, my. That always fascinates me when people tell me that. Say, well, Matthew 24 doesn't apply to the church. So, is that right? Uh-huh. Says, okay. So tell me, when is Jesus going to come back? Says, oh, no man knows the day or the hour. Said, where'd you get that? Matthew 24. So when wait a minute. How can you take Matthew 24 to apply to the church when it's convenient for you, but it's not convenient, so it becomes all for Israel? Called having your cake and eating it too. It either does or it doesn't. It either completely doesn't, completely does, or is defined in context. Now, friend, one last thing. If I point to you and I say, this generation, how many generations are in this room? There's more than one. There's more than one generation in this room. So which one am I talking to? Am I talking to anybody in here over 65, which is a totally different generation from everybody in here under 20? It's why you over 65 can't understand what's going on. You feel like you're lost and act like you stepped out on the moon one day. What's going on? The world changed. I can't understand. When he says this generation, he's pointing and looking at all the people standing there. There were children standing there. There were old people standing there. There were middle-aged standing. Which generation was he talking to? So, well, he had to be talking to the oldest one. Why? Because it's convenient for your position. Not because it's contextually based. It's not contextually based. This generation does not refer to just all these people standing there. He was talking about something totally different. Now, the reason I know that is because in Matthew 24, verse 3, the reason that is so different from Luke and Mark is because Matthew totally changed the question. He totally changed the question because he wanted to answer a totally different question. Which he did. Which is why you have Matthew 24, 3 to 31 reporting what he did.